sign the damn papers. Claire. My stepbrother's voice cracked like a whip in the sterile silence of the recovery room. I was barely awake. The anesthesia still pulling at the corners of my mind like a heavy fog. My body felt raw, hollowed out from the emergency surgery just 3 hours ago. The pain in my lower abdomen was a dull, persistent throb, a constant reminder of what I had just lost. But Jason didn't care about my pain. He didn't care that I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, my skin as pale as the sheets. He cared about one thing, and one thing only, the water rights. Jason, please, I whispered, my throat dry and scratchy. I just woke up. I don't have time for your drama, he sneered, leaning over the bed rail. His face was twisted in a mask of impatience and greed, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the sweat on his forehead. He grabbed my left arm, the one without the IV, and twisted it sharply. A gasp of pain escaped my lips as he shoved a pen into my hand. Sign it, he hissed, his breath hot and sour against my cheek. The auction is in 2 days. If we don't have those water rights transferred by then, the deal falls through. And if the deal falls through, Dad loses everything. Is that what you want? You want to be the reason he ends up on the street? Dad wouldn't want this, I managed to say, tears springing to my eyes from the physical pain in my arm and the emotional blow of his cruelty. He told me to protect the land. Dad doesn't know what day it is, Jason shouted, squeezing my wrist harder. He's gone. Claire, his mind is mush. Mom and I are running things now, and we say sell. So, sign the paper. Or so help me God. I will make sure you never see him again. I'll have security block you at the gate. You'll never step foot on the heritage again. He yanked my arm again. A sharp jolt that sent a spike of agony through my shoulder. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but cold, empty ambition. He wasn't my brother. He was a predator who smelled blood. And in that moment, lying helpless in a hospital gown, bleeding and broken, I realized something terrifying. He wasn't going to stop, unless I stopped him. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I see every comment. And I'd love to know who's part of our community, to understand why I was lying in that hospital bed, broken and bleeding. You have to understand what I walked into 3 weeks earlier. I had returned to the heritage not as a daughter coming home, but as a ghost haunting the hallways of a house that no longer recognized me. The vineyard was my mother's legacy, a sprawling expanse of green hills and ancient vines that used to smell like wet earth and sun-warmed grapes. But when I stepped onto the porch that afternoon, the air smelled sterile. It smelled like bleach and decay. My father, Robert, was sitting in his favorite leather armchair by the window, staring blankly at the driveway. He was a man who used to be able to taste a grape and tell you exactly which week it should be harvested. He was vibrant, loud, and brilliant. But the man in the chair was a shell. His eyes were milky and vacant, his hands trembling in his lap. Dad, I had whispered, kneeling beside him. It's Claire. I'm home. He didn't blink. He didn't turn. He just kept staring at the dust motes, dancing in the light. He's having a bad day, dear. A voice cooed from the doorway. Cynthia walked in, carrying a tray of tea and pills. My stepmother moved with the silent, the efficient grace of the hospice nurse she used to be. She smiled at me. A tight, practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes. It's the dementia, she sighed, setting the tray down. It's progressing so fast. The doctor says his cognitive decline is severe. It's best if you don't upset him. Claire. He gets confused when people from the past show up. People from the past. I was his daughter. I was the one who had just wired $25,000 of my own savings money. I had scraped together from 6 years of working double harvests in Napa and Bordeaux, just to keep the winery's electricity on. I was the one paying the property taxes while she played the grieving wife. I walked out to the vines to breathe. They were healthy, heavy with fruit. But the business was rotting from the inside out. I had seen the overdue notices piled on the kitchen counter. I knew the accounts were bleeding dry. I stayed because I had promised my mother on her deathbed that I would protect this land. I paid the bills because I believed I was paying for my father's care. But as I looked back at the house, watching Cynthia stroke my father's hair through the window, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I realized then that I had been looking at this all wrong. We always think predators break in through the window with a weapon. But the most dangerous ones don't break in. They wait to be invited. They find the cracks in a family's foundation, the grief, the silence, the loneliness, and they slip inside like a draft. Cynthia didn't steal my father's money first. She stole his reality. She targeted a grieving widower and systematically isolated him until she was the only voice he heard, the only face he saw, the only truth he knew. She was a Trojan horse, built out of false comfort. And by the time we realized she was an enemy, she was already holding the keys to the castle. I thought I was fighting a failing business. I didn't realize I was fighting a parasite that had already consumed its host. And now, lying in that hospital bed, with Jason's threats ringing in my ears, I knew the parasite was hungry for the rest. I didn't sign the papers. I walked out of that hospital against medical advice, my body screaming with every step, and drove straight back to the only home I had ever known. But when I pulled into the gravel driveway of the Heritage, my heart stopped. My belongings weren't in my room. They were piled in the old tractor barn, exposed to the damp air. My books, my clothes, the framed photo of my mother holding me under the trellis, all of it thrown into cardboard boxes like trash. I stormed into the main house, adrenaline momentarily dulling the pain in my incision. The living room, usually a sanctuary of dark wood and silence, was buzzing with noise. Jason was standing by the fireplace, holding a blueprint. Next to him was Samantha, his girlfriend, a 24-year-old influencer who thought wine came from a box. She was holding a laser measuring tape, pointing it at the wall where my father's portrait used to hang. "We can knock this wall out," she was saying, her voice high and grating. "Open concept. Make it a reception area for the spa. We need to modernize the aesthetic if we want to attract the luxury wellness crowd." "A spa," I choked out, leaning against the doorframe for support. Jason spun around. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed, like I was a stain he had forgotten to scrub out. "You're back early," he said, rolling up the blueprints. "I thought you'd take a hint." "You threw my things in the barn," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "This is my house." "Jason, you can't just... It's not your house," he interrupted. Stepping closer, he loomed over me, using his height to intimidate, just like he had in the hospital. "And it's not going to be a vineyard much longer, either. We're selling the land to a developer next week. He's flattening the vines to build a resort. The house stays as the centerpiece. But the grapes, they're dirt." "You can't sell," I said. "Dad would never allow it." "Dad isn't in charge anymore," a cool voice cut in. Cynthia descended the stairs, holding a document in her manicured hand. She looked impeccable, untouched by the chaos she was orchestrating. She held the paper out to me. It was a power of attorney, signed by my father 3 months ago. "Robert has been declared incompetent," she said softly, a terrifyingly calm smile on her lips. "I make the decisions now, and I've decided that we are liquidating. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, Claire, or I'll have the sheriff remove you for trespassing." Jason puffed up his chest, emboldened by her presence. "You heard her. Get out." "Quiet, Jason," Cynthia snapped, not even looking at him. "I'm handling this." And then I saw it. The flinch. It was microscopic. A tiny contraction of his shoulders. A quick blink of his eyes. Jason. The man who had twisted my arm in a hospital bed. The man who shouted and threatened. Shrank instantly at the sound of his mother's voice. He looked down at his shoes. His aggression evaporating into submissive silence. I realized then that I wasn't looking at a partner in crime. I was looking at a victim who had been molded into a weapon. Jason wasn't driven by greed alone. He was driven by a desperate, pathetic terror of the woman standing next to him. He was the golden child. Yes. But the gold was just paint over a cracked foundation. He bullied me because it was the only time he felt powerful. He was desperate to be useful to her. To prove his worth. Because he knew exactly what happened to people Cynthia no longer needed. She wasn't just my enemy. She was his monster. 24 hours. Cynthia repeated, turning her back on us. Don't make a scene. Dear. It's bad for the brand. She walked away, leaving Jason standing there, looking small and hateful. He glared at me, trying to regain his composure. But the illusion was broken. I didn't fear him anymore. I pitied him. But pity wouldn't save the vineyard. I needed leverage, and I knew exactly where to find it. I didn't pack. I didn't leave. Instead, I waited until the house was dark, until Jason's snoring echoed down the hall, and the only light came from the security beams outside. Then, I slipped out the back door and ran toward the old carriage house where Stacy lived. Stacy was the vineyard's former CFO. A woman who could spot a missing penny in $1 million budget. She had been fired by Cynthia 6 months ago for insubordination, which in Cynthia speak meant asking too many questions. But Stacy had kept something Cynthia didn't know about, a spare key to the private reserve cellar. I knocked softly on her door. Stacy opened it instantly. Dressed in a robe. A shotgun, leaning against the wall behind her. I figured you'd show up eventually, she said, her voice gravelly from sleep. They're selling the land, I said, breathless. Next week. Stacy didn't look surprised. I know. I saw the surveyors. What do you need? I need to see the books. The real books. And I need to get into the cellar. We moved through the vineyard like shadows, guided by the moonlight reflecting off the grape leaves. The private reserve cellar was built into the hillside. A temperature-controlled vault that held the estate's most valuable vintages. It was also where my father kept his personal records. Stacy unlocked the heavy oak door, and we slipped inside. The air was cool and smelled of oak and aging wine. We went straight to the small office in the back. Stacy pulled a ledger from behind a loose stone in the wall. I hid this before they escorted me out, she whispered, opening it on the desk. Look here. She pointed to a series of transactions. My eyes widened. Shell companies. Dozens of them. Stacy confirmed. Distribution fees. Consulting retainers. Equipment rentals, all paid to companies that don't exist. Cynthia has been siphoning money out of this business for 3 years. $1.5 million. Claire. That's why the winery is failing. It's not the market. It's theft. We have them. I breathed, my heart racing. This is embezzlement. It's proof of theft, Stacy corrected. But it doesn't stop the sale. As power of attorney, Cynthia can sell whatever she wants. Even if she's stealing the proceeds. We need something that breaks her legal hold on your father. I looked around the cellar. Desperate. There had to be something else. My father was meticulous. He wouldn't have let this happen without a fight. And then I saw it. In the far corner, behind a stack of dusty barrels labeled reserved, was a single slot in the wine rack. It looked empty, but something glinted in the shadows. I walked over and reached deep into the rack. My fingers brushed against cold glass. I pulled it out. It was a single bottle of wine, unlabeled except for a piece of masking tape with handwriting that made my throat close up. It was my father's writing, but shaky. erratic. Like he was fighting his own hand. Cynthia's mercy. "What is that?" Stacy asked, stepping closer. "I don't know," I whispered. But Dad hid it. He hid it where only I would look. I turned the bottle over. Taped to the back was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't a note. It was a receipt from a private toxicology lab. Dated 6 months ago. I read the results. And the world tilted on its axis. "Stacy," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not wine." "What?" "It's a sample," I said, looking at the dark liquid inside the bottle with horror. He bottled a sample of his own daily tonic, the one Cynthia makes him. I handed her the report. Stacy scanned it, and her face went white. "Arsenic," she read, "and mercury. Lethal levels." "He knew," I said, tears streaming down my face. He knew he was being poisoned. He couldn't speak. He couldn't fight. But he saved the evidence. This wasn't just embezzlement anymore. It wasn't just a hostile takeover. I held the bottle tight, feeling the weight of my father's silent scream in my hands. This was a murder weapon, and I was going to use it to bury them. We didn't call the sheriff. Not yet. In a town this small. The sheriff played poker with Jason on Tuesday nights. We needed something stronger than a local badge. We needed a shark. We drove to the edge of the property, where the old caretaker's shed sat half hidden by overgrown briars. It was the only part of the heritage that Jason hadn't bothered to measure for renovation. Mostly because he was terrified of the man living inside. Kenneth was a former district attorney who had prosecuted more corruption cases than anyone in the state, until a bottle of scotch and a messy divorce derailed his career. He lived rent-free in the shed because my father believed in second chances. I banged on the metal door. "Kenneth, wake up." The door creaked open. Kenneth stood there, unshaven, wearing a stained undershirt. But his eyes were sharp, devoid of the haze I expected. He looked at the bottle in my hand, then at Stacy's shotgun, and stepped back to let us in. "I assume this isn't a social call," he rasped, sweeping a pile of law books off his small table. I set the bottle of Cynthia's mercy in the center of the room, like a grenade. Beside it, I placed the toxicology report. "Dad isn't sick," I said, my voice vibrating with a cold, terrifying clarity. "He's being murdered." Kenneth put on his spectacles and picked up the report. He read it in silence. The only sound in the room was the hum of an old refrigerator and the thudding of my own heart. He read it once, then again. Then he looked at the bottle. "Mercury and arsenic," he murmured, his voice losing its gravelly edge, replaced by the precise, lethal tone of a prosecutor. "The old-school cocktail. Where did you find this?" Stacy found the bottle in the reserve cellar. Kenneth examined it and immediately understood Robert had recorded his own evidence because no one would believe a man with dementia. The symptoms weren't Alzheimer's. They were poisoning. Heavy metals mimicked tremors, confusion, and memory loss. Cynthia was breaking down his mind before she killed him. Kenneth explained the urgency once she sold the land and moved the money offshore. Robert would suffer a convenient decline. And without an autopsy, all traces would disappear. We had probable cause. But turning this over to local police would give Cynthia room to manipulate the narrative. Instead, we would let her walk into the auction believing she had won and then expose her. At the sale, Jason and Cynthia celebrated prematurely. I entered, looking defeated, letting them think I'd accepted their offer. When they pushed the paperwork at me, I asked one question: had Mr. Sterling seen the toxicity report? Panic erupted. I revealed the real evidence, the poisoned wine, and played Jason and Cynthia's recorded conversation about needing Robert dead. The developer walked out. State troopers entered. Jason was arrested, and Cynthia immediately threw him under the bus. Both were taken away, Jason pleading. Cynthia, cold. 6 months later, After brutal chelation therapy, my father's mind finally cleared. He would never fully recover. But he was alive. We rebuilt the vineyard, rejecting the developer's plans and returning to our roots. Jason took a plea deal. Cynthia received life without parole. But justice wasn't the true victory. Renewal was. We destroyed the poisoned wine and created a new vintage resurrection. With the recovered money, I founded the Mercy Foundation to fight elder abuse and financial exploitation, helping families recognize what had almost destroyed mine. As my father and I toasted under the harvest moon, I understood real revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding something beautiful on the ruins they left behind. If this story resonates, share it and tell me in the comments if you've ever had to protect someone you love. I read every one.